Hi, I'm Lisa. Welcome back to Biblical Reality Check. After Jesus explains how truth enters the human heart in the parable of the sower, how truth, once integrated, expresses itself naturally in the parable of the lamp and lampstand, and why new awareness cannot be forced into old structures in the parable of the new wine and cloth, he tells another parable, the parable of the wheat and tares, which addresses some questions many people ask, often without realizing they're asking them, such as, why doesn't awakening immediately make us whole? Why does truth seem to coexist with confusion? And why does growing awareness feel so uncomfortable? Jesus answers these questions with the parable of the wheat and the tares, found in Matthew 13, verses 24 to 30 and verses 36 to 43. He begins by telling a story of a farmer who sows good seed in his field. But while everyone is sleeping, an enemy comes and sows weeds among the wheat. When the plants grow, the servants notice the weeds and ask, "Do you want us to pull them?" The farmer says no, because if you pull the weeds too early, you will uproot the wheat with them. Let them grow together until the harvest. Then the wheat will be gathered and the weeds will be burned. Traditionally, this parable is read as righteous people versus sinners, or believers versus unbelievers. But that reading immediately creates fear and judgment, and it ignores something essential. The field is one field, which Jesus later explains in verse 38 is the world. But read through the lens of consciousness, the world, as Jesus uses it here, is not geography. It's referring to the inner world of the human mind. In Jungian psychology, this is the psyche, the totality of consciousness and non consciousness. This parable is not about separating people, it's about integrating the self. The wheat represents your true self, your authentic desires, and your awakened identity. The weeds represent old patterns, inherited beliefs, trauma responses, ego defenses, and shadow material. In the ancient world, tares looked exactly like wheat until maturity. It was not until the plants were grown that the weeds became noticeable. Jesus notes this fact when he says, quote, "When the wheat sprouted and bore grain, then the tares became evident also." The fact that the weeds are not obvious at the beginning and they only appear as growth occurs is an important observation because it mirrors a deep psychological truth. As awareness increases, unresolved material surfaces. When the light comes on, you don't just see the aspects of yourself that are desirable and good, you also see all the muck. You see the shadow self, all the fears, ego strategies, and mistakes you've made, along with all your unresolved issues. Not because awakening failed, but because it is working. This is exactly what psychology tells us. Just as the wheat and the tares both grow in the same soil and both look similar until the harvest, growth does not eliminate what is in our non conscious awareness, it reveals it. That's why awakening oftentimes feels confusing. You don't yet know which voice is the wheat and which is the weed. Jesus says in the parable that the enemy sowed the weeds, quote, while men slept. This doesn't represent a spirit or demon. It is referring to the subconscious. In Carl Jung's language, the enemy is the shadow, the parts of you that you did not consciously choose, but rather inherited, absorbed, or developed for survival. In the Old Testament, this mirrors Israel's story. Foreign seeds planted among the covenant people, idols among the holy places, and false prophets among the true. In neuroscience, this is implicit memory, patterns formed before you were aware. Although psychology and ancient wisdom tell us that the weeds may not be our fault, they still remain our responsibility. In verse 28 of the parable, the servants ask, "Do you want us then to go and gather them up?" referring to the tares. But the farmer says no, because the roots are intertwined with the wheat. In psychology, this is profound. Your false self grew from your need to survive, and your shadow self grew from what you were not allowed to express. If you rip out the weeds too early, you damage the wheat. This is why awakening cannot be rushed. Premature self judgment damages growth. Shadow work isn't about destroying parts of yourself. It's about learning to hold and eventually integrate them. Integrating your shadow self involves bringing your non conscious, repressed traits into your conscious awareness. You achieve wholeness by acknowledging these parts without shame and safely channeling their energy into productive, positive outlets rather than letting them control you. When people try to eliminate the shadow too quickly, seeing it as something to purge rather than understand, they often destabilize the very structures that make integration possible. For example, I previously thought the ego was something to get rid of, but in reality, it acts as the organizing center of your experience. It gives you continuity, perspective, and the ability to process change. Similarly, defenses like denial or repression may feel limiting, but they serve as temporary safeguards, protecting you from emotional intensity you're not yet ready to handle. If you strip these away too fast, the underlying material, like regret, fear, shame, anger, etc., can surface all at once, overwhelming your ability to regulate your emotions. Instead of clarity, you may experience confusion, anxiety, depression, or even fragmentation of identity. A helpful way to understand this is through the metaphor of renovating a house. Your psyche is the house. The shadow is everything hidden behind walls or buried in the foundation, and your ego and defenses are the load bearing structures and temporary supports. Healthy shadow work is like careful renovation. You inspect the hidden areas, reinforce what's unstable, and gradually update the structure so it becomes stronger and more coherent. But if you start tearing down walls indiscriminately, especially the ones that hold everything up, the house doesn't transform, it collapses. True integration requires strengthening your ability to stay present with difficult emotions while maintaining a stable sense of self. Over time, as that capacity grows, the roots of the shadow and the false structures around it begin to separate naturally. You don't have to rip them out, they loosen on their own. In that process, nothing essential is destroyed. Instead, the system reorganizes into something more resilient, where previously hidden parts are no longer threatening, but understood and consciously integrated into the whole self. This is why awakening requires patience. In the early stages of awakening, the wheat and the weeds look identical. But as consciousness expands, the wheat grows upright and the weeds bend under their own weight. Discernment comes with maturity. Later, Jesus explains the parable privately to his disciples. He speaks of harvest as the end of the age, where the lawless will burn up and the righteous will enter the kingdom. However, the harvest is not about separation and death. The harvest represents integration. The wheat that is gathered is your true self, your authentic identity, your awakened consciousness. The weeds, your old stories, inherited fears, and survival patterns are burned not as punishment, but as transformation. In the Old Testament, fire purifies. In Jungian psychology, fire symbolizes transmutation, the conversion of shadow into energy. In neuroscience, this is synaptic pruning, a natural neurodevelopmental process where the brain removes weak, redundant, or unused neural connections to improve overall cognitive efficiency. The weeds are not evidence that you are not awakened. They are evidence that you are awakening. They surface because the light has increased. The harvest comes when the wheat is strong enough to stand on its own, when your true self has matured enough to release what no longer serves you, when the roots have naturally separated and the false self can fall away without harming the real you. And this is why Jesus tells the parable right after the parable of the sower, the parable of the lamp and lampstand, and the parable of the new wine, new cloth. Because once truth enters you, once it begins to illuminate you, once it stretches you beyond your old containers, you will inevitably meet the parts of yourself that cannot go with you into the next stage. But seeing your inner contradictions is only the beginning. The next question becomes, what foundation will you build your life on now that you can see clearly? That is where Jesus takes us next. The parable of the wise and foolish builders is not just a story about storms. It is a story about structure, about the inner architecture of consciousness, about what happens when truth is not only planted and revealed, but practiced, embodied, and built into the very ground of your being. See you there. Thanks for watching.